We are continuing in the letter of, there we go, of St. Paul to the Philippians. And this morning we are looking at how to find joy in our faith. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, there were a whole lot of folks in my church that kind of looked like they'd been sucking on vinegar all morning long. You know, those folks at church looking like this? And I always thought, why the heck are you here? You don't look like you're having any fun. You don't look like you're experiencing the joy of Christ. And as I was reading through Philippians, I began to understand why. Because they weren't doing it right. This morning, the Apostle Paul is going to help us understand how to do this Christian stuff right. Interestingly enough, this is one of those key passages from the Reformation. A passage we studied a couple of weeks ago in the Romans Bible study, and this passage from Philippians were key to what Martin Luther discovered, and it changed him enough that he wanted to write up these 95 theses and nail them to the door at Wittenberg. And when he did that, not only the church changed forever, but the world changed forever. 500 years ago today, some amazing things happened. Well, let's look at how we might have misunderstood this whole Christianity stuff. And it all comes from the understanding of works righteousness. You see, in the 1500s, the Catholic Church had, well, it was the only church other than the Eastern Orthodox Church, had kind of stumbled out of the real gospel and into some other things. And they had decided that you had to do certain things in order to be righteous. You had to earn your way to heaven. It's called works righteousness. And if this doesn't stop going in and out, I'm going to be having to say some cuss words. Works righteousness is you don't drink or smoke or chew or dance with girls that do. That you say 7 Hail Marys and 4 Our Fathers. But that's not where righteousness comes from. You see, faith is not about, first, how you look. Paul says, steer clear of the barking dogs, those religious busybodies, all bark and no bite. All they're interested in is appearances. It's not about how you look. You don't have to dress a certain way to be a Christian. If it was, I'd be going to hell. When I was a young youth pastor guy, I caught a lot of guff from some of the more mature members of my church congregation because I had long hair. Just about every Sunday they'd say, you need to get a haircut. Stop that. I'm not sure why it's doing that. We must have a bad connection. We'll check that out. Anyway, same with my parents. From the time I was about 13 until the time I was about 30, my parents were always saying to me, why don't you get a haircut? The difference between my generation and my son's generation is from the time they were 13 until the time they were about 20, we kept saying to them, why don't you grow your hair out a little bit? Now all 3 of my sons have nice, beautiful, long hair and beards. They look just like Jesus. They misunderstood me. I told them I wanted them to be like Jesus. But Christianity is not about how you look. There's no standard for dress or appearance. Too many times when we focus on appearance, we miss the important things about the faith. Our faith is not about how you look. And secondly, faith is not about what you do. One of the things that we discovered in the Reformation process was we can never do enough to earn our way to heaven. We can never be good enough to be righteous. We just can't live up to it. Faith is not about what you do. Doesn't mean you don't do things. Doesn't mean because of the love that you've experienced and the grace that God has given you, you don't return that favor to other folks. But if we set it up to be, I got to witness to 3 people this week or I'm going to hell. That's not what it's about. It's not about what you do. It's not about how you look. And third, it's not about your pedigree. Paul lists his pedigree. He was the Jew of all Jews. He did everything right, and it still wasn't good enough. There's an old saying, God has no grandchildren. We are all responsible for our own relationship with God. And just because you grew up in the right family and your parents were pillars of the local church, and just because you joined all the right clubs and did all the right things, that doesn't mean a thing. That's called works righteousness, and that's what Jesus came to change. Paul shows us that the appropriate way to righteousness is faith righteousness. If you're not finding joy in your faith, if you're not finding joy in your relationship with Jesus, it's probably because you're doing it wrong. And here are 3 things the Apostle Paul says that we can focus on in order to do it correctly. This 3rd chapter of Philippians, Paul is giving us some new insights on some new things. And there are 3 new things about faith that Paul wants us to understand this morning. First, faith is all about deferring to Christ. The very credentials these people are waving around as something special, I'm tearing up and throwing out with the trash, along with everything else I used to take credit for. And why? Because of Christ. In comparison with what Christ did for us, the things that we try to do for Christ are but rubbish. Doesn't mean we should stop doing them, but we're not doing them in order to attain righteousness. It's already been given to us if we would but have faith in Him. We need to stop making it all about me and start making it all about Jesus. Faith is all about deferring to Christ, and faith is all about knowing Christ. Paul says, compared to the high privilege of knowing Jesus Christ as my master firsthand, everything I once thought I had going for me is insignificant dog dung. I don't know if he could have said it a whole lot more clearly. We need to make sure that we know who this Jesus person is. We need to spend some time with Him. If you want to get to know somebody, you spend time with Him. If you want to get to know Christ, spend some time with Him. Spend some time in His Word. Come to the pastor's Bible study on Wednesday night. Commercial. If we have the opportunity to get to know Him better, our faith will deepen. And because our faith deepens, our righteousness deepens and our joy deepens. Faith is all about deferring to Christ. It's about knowing Christ. And finally, faith is about embracing Christ. I've dumped it all in the trash so that I could embrace Christ and be embraced by Him. Too often in life, we try to embrace the stuff of life. We put all of our self-worth on our net worth. We put all of our value in our valuables. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't work that way. We need to embrace Christ because we will discover our value in Him. And when we discover our value is in Christ, that's when we can experience joy because we know it's not about us. If you've been spending your whole life trying to live up to some standard that you think God has set for you, I'm really sorry. Because that preacher that told you had to do that was wrong. All you need to do is embrace Christ because He set the standard. He took His value and imputed it to us. I've said it before that we all have this picture about when we go before the judgment seat with our knees a-knocking, and they'll open up that big book, and they're going to start reading off all the bad things that we ever did in our whole life. But that's not the way it's going to work for those of us who know Christ. Because when they open up that big book and they start reading, All of the stuff that we have done will have been erased. And Christ will have gone in and replaced it with all of the good things that He did. And when they start reading, heaven is going to start applauding. That's faith righteousness. That's what this Reformation was all about. Helping us to understand that our value comes from the value of Christ, because He graciously gave us that gift. It's more than just bagpipes, although the bagpipes are pretty cool. It's about changing the world, changing the understanding of who we are in the light of Christ's love for us. Paul is showing us some new things in this 3rd chapter of Philippians. And in this first part, he wants us to understand that we need to have new values. Our value is not in our valuables. Our value comes from Christ. And trust me, folks, there ain't nothing more valuable that you could ever find.